The wind had just started to pick up when Miles Banning pulled into his lakeside property. His old pickup rattled to a stop near the gate as he flipped through a pile of mail the HOA had left jammed into his fence again. Most of it was trash. Same as always, warnings about lawn color, a notice about unapproved vehicle types, and a pink violation slip for inadequate curtain hues. He muttered under his breath and stuffed the stack into his glove box. The property had been in his family for decades, but ever since the new HOA board got aggressive, especially their president, Karen Ellingsworth, things had started to feel like a daily ambush. That day, however, the petty violations were just the appetizer. As Miles reached his front door, he noticed someone walking up the gravel path behind him, clipboard in hand. That stiff walk, that half-smile people wear when they're trying to pretend they're not already mad. It was Karen. She didn't even say hello, Mr. Banning. She started, already flipping a page. We have reason to believe this residence is being unlawfully leased. Miles raised an eyebrow. Lease, I live here. Karen's eyes flicked up, unimpressed. Proof of residency. He blinked, pulled out his wallet, and handed her his driver's license, still slightly damp from the sweat in his back pocket. Karen took it then, with a glance at the gutter beside them. She tore it in half, right there, without a word. She walked away, tossing both halves into the sewer, drained like she was discarding a gum wrapper. Miles just stood there, speechless. No one had ever crossed that line before, not even Karen. That wasn't HOA authority, that was personal. He didn't shout, he didn't argue. He simply pulled out his phone and made one call. And that's where it began. Not the war over code violations. Not the battle over mailboxes or weeds. Something bigger. Something Karen would have never expected. Because that one call wasn't to a lawyer. It wasn't to the police either. It was to someone who knew exactly what Karen had been hiding for years. Someone she thought she'd paid off. Someone who had every blueprint, financial statement, and off-the-books permit related to a property she was building an hour away. A property she had kept in her husband's name. A project she swore no one would trace back to her. Miles had no intention of yelling. He wanted to crack the foundation beneath her feet and the person he'd just called. They had the dynamite. Back at Karen's house, she was already drafting another fine. She felt triumphant, delusional. She didn't know someone had just flipped the hourglass upside down, and she certainly didn't know that her $7 billion mansion dream, built with shady zoning loopholes, fake environmental permits, and a list of silent investors, was hanging by a thread that just got yanked. That wasn't just an ID Karen destroyed. It was a fuse, and the fire's just getting started. Stick around, because by the time it hits her, she won't even see who lit the match. 3 days passed, and Karen hadn't thought twice about the ID. To her, it was a moment of petty dominance, one more notch in her long list of neighborhood wins. She wore power like perfume, heavy and obvious, and the HOA board treated her like royalty. Everyone else either feared her or ignored her. But somewhere around day 4, Karen noticed something. Not fear, not submission, silence. Miles hadn't responded. No angry email, no complaint, not even a single Facebook rant in the HOA group. He simply vanished from the usual noise, and that, more than any shouting match, unsettled her. She told herself he must have gone to get a new ID. Nothing more. Still, she double-checked the gate cameras. No sign of him entering or leaving. Then again, he could have a second way in. Her eye twitched. That night, Karen met with her contractor Gerald at a quiet cafe outside town, the same man she'd paid under the table to handle unique zoning matters for her lakefront mansion project. The property was enormous. She called it Rivervale Heights, and it was meant to be her legacy. 15 acres, 6 levels, indoor elevator, panoramic glass walls, even a private underground tunnel to the WATERLINE. Only it wasn't supposed to be public knowledge. Everything good on your end? Karen asked, stirring her tea with a nervous rhythm. Gerald, a man who usually greeted her with a greasy smirk, was strangely quiet. His eyes darted to the window, then back to her. Someone's asking questions about the permits. Karen, spoon froze. Who? He shrugged. Wouldn't say. Used a burner number. Knew about the back-end filings. Knew about the switch in property ownership. Even asked about the land use variance you pushed through last spring. Karen's throat tightened. No names. None. But whoever it is, they knew about the water drainage study we faked. That's buried 6 folders deep in the city archive. Her voice dropped. That study is the only reason we got past the environmental board. If that collapses, I know. They sat in silence. Karan's mind was no longer in the cafe. It was back in the neighborhood. Back at Miles's cabin. Back at the exact moment she tore that ID and let it drop into the storm drain. Like it meant nothing. Her mansion wasn't just a dream. It was a castle built on threads of silence, favors, and buried forms. If one of those threads snapped, back in the neighborhood, Miles wasn't hiding. He was preparing. The person he'd called was named Vanessa Parka, quiet but ruthless investigator, with a knack for city-level corruption. She wasn't in law enforcement anymore, but she had friends in places that still made people nervous. She didn't work for free, but she loved one thing more than money, a perfect takedown. And this one, it was shaping up to be her favorite. Miles had shared everything: how Karen used HOA fines like a personal tax system, how she'd blocked permits for certain residents while rubber stamping her own, and most importantly how she destroyed his ID without due process and discarded it in public drainage. Violating half a dozen federal statutes, Vanessa hadn't blinked. She'd just asked one question: does she have money tied up in unfinished land? Miles smiled. She calls it Rivervale Heights. You'll find it under her husband's shell company. But the handprints are all hers. Karen didn't know it yet, but every piece of her dream project was now under quiet review. Vanessa's team had already flagged suspicious zoning adjustments, permit gaps, and forged inspections. And a certain state agency one that Karen thought had signed off months ago was about to reopen a file she hoped had disappeared forever on the HOA's private forum. Things remained calm. Karen posted her usual past updates about weeds and fence paint, but the usual backpats were absent. Fewer likes, fewer replies. Something had shifted. She could feel it. In the quiet, suspicion grows louder, and in Karen's silence, a storm was gathering that she wouldn't see until it shattered her roof. She thought she'd buried every trail, but someone just dug them up with gloves on. The paper trail's about to catch fire, and the mansion she built on silence might not survive the noise. Stay close. It gets worse. Let me know when you're ready for part 3, where Karen starts trying to control the narrative while the truth starts leaking behind her back. Ready. Karen never liked surprises. That's why she ran the HOA like a military base with policies no one asked for, inspections no one needed, and power that stretched far beyond what the bylaws actually allowed. It gave her a sense of order, of control, but the cracks were starting to show. On Monday morning, the usual HOA board breakfast was unusually quiet. Gerald, the contractor, hadn't returned her calls since their meeting. 2 other board members looked distracted. One of them, Linda. The treasurer, kept glancing at her phone like she was waiting for something that hadn't come. Karen pushed her cup aside and cleared her throat. I'd like to make a motion to increase the late payment fee to $7. People are getting lazy. No one responded. Linda finally looked up. Karen, did you really tear up a resident's ID? The question hit the table like a brick. Karen's smile didn't crack, but her voice sharpened. It was invalid. I suspected it was fake. I took action. I heard it wasn't fake. Linda replied carefully. I heard it was state-issued, and I heard you threw it into the sewer. Karen's lips thinned. Where did you hear that? Linda didn't answer. Neither did anyone else. In that moment, Karen knew what she had refused to admit until now. Someone was talking. And worse, someone was listening. Back at Miles's cabin, things were quiet, purposefully quiet. He'd installed new motion detectors, switched out his locks, and left the front porch lights off at night. He wanted Karen, uncertain, uneasy. He didn't need to confront her again. He just needed her to keep wondering when the next shoe would drop. And it was dropping soon. Vanessa had sent him a message that morning. The State Building Commission had reopened the Rivervale Heights file, and a city planner had quietly recused himself from 2 permits that had errors on them, errors that Vanessa's team had traced back to forged wetland maps. Karen had paid top dollar to fake those maps. Now the real ones were being reviewed under satellite overlay. One mistake, and her entire foundation would be deemed illegal development. That wasn't just a fine. That was criminal liability. Still, Karen wasn't giving up control. That afternoon, she marched straight into Miles's property, snapping photos of his siding, his mailbox, even the slope of his gravel. Her hands were shaking, but her clipboard masked it well. Miles didn't confront her. Instead, from behind the closed blinds, he filmed her trespassing. Then he emailed the footage with timestamp coordinates and a record of prior complaints to Vanessa. The pressure was mounting from all sides, and Karen didn't even realize who she was really up against. She returned to her home and found a manila envelope on her doorstep. No name, no postage. Inside was a printed list, every name tied to the Rivervale Heights Investment Group, every signature, every amendment she had made to the zoning proposal, even the altered PDF files from her husband's shell company, traced back to her IP address. Her throat went dry. She slammed the envelope shut and looked over her shoulder. For the first time in years, Karen locked her door twice. The control she clung to had become a cage. She tried calling Gerald again. No answer. She tried the city clerk's private line. Disconnected. Even her husband, who normally brushed off her drama, had gone cold and distant after seeing the list of calls from investigators. The walls were closing in, and every new rule she enforced only made more people notice how unstable she'd become. She ruled the neighborhood like a queen, but now even her pawns were starting to walk off the board, and the one man she tried to silence was the one holding every piece of her kingdom. Stay with it, because Karen's about to pull the wrong string in part 4, and when she does, she unravel a secret even she didn't see coming. Voice echoed off the walls of the community center as she banged her gavel harder than necessary. The monthly HOA meeting had just started, but the room was already heavier than usual. Residents sat with crossed arms, muttering quietly, their eyes fixed not on the agenda but on her. The whispers had grown into something else now, not gossip, not rumors. Evidence. Karen tried to push through it. She opened with her usual tones, polished, emotionless. First item, she said, amending property fencing requirements to limit heights to 3 feet. This is to maintain neighborhood visibility and reduce visual pollution. A few people groaned. One hand went up. Miles's neighbor, Tom. Karen, do you mean the same fence height you just approved for your own place? The one that's 5 feet tall. Karen didn't flinch. Mine's a special circumstance. I have security concerns. Right? Tom muttered, folding his arms. Funny how security only applies when you're the one building it. Another hand, then another. Questions started flying faster than she could shut them down. Why did some residents get approvals in days, while others waited months? Why were HOA funds spent on private security cameras facing Karen Street? Who authorized the landscaper to rip up community plots and replace them with rocks, then send invoices to the residents? Karen snapped back with policy quotes, code sections, and dismissals. But for every answer she tried to control, someone else had a contradiction. Then it happened. A man stood up at the back of the room, quiet, unfamiliar. He held up a document. I'm here representing the Office of Environmental and Land Use Compliance, he said. This morning we opened a formal audit into a development project known as Rivervale Heights. Karen's blood went cold. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to face her. She gripped the edge of the table, but her knuckles gave her away. The man continued. We have credible evidence suggesting fraudulent permit filings, falsified wetland maps, and zoning changes that were pushed through without proper review. A complaint was filed anonymously, but it includes documents, internal HOA memos, and property ownership transfers. Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The man wasn't done. We are also investigating the misuse of HOA authority to suppress property access, falsify residency status, and destroy state-issued identification, which may involve criminal charges. Gasps broke around the room. Karen slammed her hand down. This is an ambush. These are lies. But no one came to her defense. Even Linda, the treasurer, slid her chair slightly away. Miles wasn't even there. He was at home, watching the live on his tablet with a mug of coffee, a faint smile on his face. He'd asked Vanessa not to show up in person, not yet. The state official had been enough. One voice to start the avalanche. Back at the meeting, Karen was spiraling. You all think you know everything, she snapped, eyes darting around. You think I built this place with lies? I've protected this neighborhood. I've kept your property values high. You're welcome. But no one applauded. No one thanked her. Someone whispered, you tore up a man's ID. Someone else muttered, how much did your husband pocket from that development? Her voice cracked. Get out, all of you. This meeting is adjourned. She grabbed her binder and stormed out, knocking over a chair on her way. The doors slammed shut behind her. In the parking lot, the cold air hit her face, but it didn't cool the fire building in her chest. She fumbled with her phone, dialing Gerald again. Voicemail. Again. Then she tried her husband. Voicemail. Her fingers trembled. Suddenly, a text popped up. No name, no number, just one message. Check your email. She hesitated, then tapped into her inbox. What she saw wasn't just a threat. It was a full package. Maps, bank statements, permit history, zoning changes, and a single-line note at the end. This is what justice looks like before it knocks. She thought she could scream down the storm, but storms don't listen, and this one was just reaching her front door. Part 5 is where her past choices crash into her present, and the one person she trusted the most finally reveals what they've been hiding all along. Karen stared at her screen long after the email had stopped loading. Her inbox had never looked like this, flooded with subject lines filled with words like review required, violation notice, and permit suspension pending. She wasn't losing control anymore. She'd already lost it, and now she had to figure out who helped pull the rug out from under her. It had to be someone close. The files leaked were too specific to internal board access, HOA banking, meeting minutes that hadn't been public. She called an emergency board session. No agenda, just panic. 4 board members showed up. The only one who didn't, Linda. Karen stared at the empty seat like it was glowing. Tom, who had never challenged her before, was the first to speak. Linda quit, said she wanted no part in what's coming. Karen's voice was calm, but the edge was razor-thin. What exactly is coming? Tom glanced at the others, unsure who still supported her. You tell us. Karen turned to Brad, the HOA's so-called legal advisor. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. She demanded answers. Who gave access to the HOA's private server? There were internal records in that email. Private memos, financial transfers. Brad finally spoke. I didn't authorize anything. Someone did, she snapped. Silence again. Karen turned to her last card, her husband, Charles. He had always stayed quiet, always stayed in the background, but she'd leaned on his name for the Rivervale Heights paperwork, used his Shell LLC to mask her tracks. That night, she waited for him to come home, pacing by the kitchen window like a caged animal. When his headlights finally lit the driveway, she flung the door open before he reached the porch. You need to tell me what you gave them. she hissed. Charles didn't speak right away. His face looked unfamiliar to Tachi, like he'd spent the last week on another planet. He stepped inside, brushed past her, and set his keys down slowly. They came to me, he said, and I told them the truth. Karen blinked, stunned. What truth? She asked, voice trembling. Charles sat down, took off his jacket, and didn't look up. The permits weren't clean. The zoning approvals weren't legal. And you made me put my name on all of it. I wasn't going to prison for your ego. Her breath caught in her chest. You turned on me, she said. I didn't turn, he replied. I got out of the way. She couldn't speak. Her own husband had folded under pressure not to protect her, but to protect himself. What else did you give them? She whispered. He finally looked up. Everything. Her knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself. Then came the final blow. There's a federal investigator coming next week, he added. Vanessa Park. She's compiling a fraud case, and they think the HOA was used to launder zoning money. Karen tried to shout, but nothing came out. Her voice had been her sharpest weapon for years. Now it failed her when she needed it most. Charles stood again. I've already handed over my statements. I suggest you do the same. He left the room, and Karen, for the first time in her reign, realized she was alone. Truly alone. At the neighborhood park the next day, the community buzzed with quiet satisfaction. Whispers passed like electricity. Residents nodded to Miles with a new kind of respect, though he never said much. He didn't have to. Karen had lit her own fire, and now, her closest ally had poured gasoline on it. She built her empire with whispers, papers, and pressure. But now even the signatures are testifying, and her last lifeline just cut himself free. Part 6 is where the world outside the HOA gets involved, and Karen finds herself in a place she always thought she controlled, the courtroom. But this time, she's not the one filing complaints. She's the one answering them. Karen never liked courtrooms. They reminded her of losing control, and Karen Ellingsworth hated nothing more than losing control. But on Thursday morning, she found herself standing beneath a cracked ceiling fan in courtroom to be, trying to stay composed while every part of her life was being unpacked in public. It wasn't just about the HOA anymore. The city had filed an official motion to freeze further development on Rivervale Heights. And now, a preliminary hearing had been called to determine whether criminal charges were warranted. The complaint referenced zoning fraud, false filing of environmental reports, destruction of state-issued identification, and use of an HOA to influence public infrastructure approval. She sat at the defense table, flanked by a local attorney she barely trusted. Charles wasn't beside her. He was outside the building, sitting on a bench like a stranger waiting for a bus. At the prosecution's table sat a woman in a tailored gray suit with a quiet confidence Karen immediately hated. Vanessa Park. Karen narrowed her eyes, trying to size her up. Vanessa never looked her way. She didn't need to. The judge entered. The bailiff called the room to order. What followed wasn't fireworks or shouting. It was death by 1,000 receipts. Vanessa opened her folder and read dates, numbers, transactions. Permit 134B was pushed through in 21 hours despite objections from the Wetlands Department, she said, her tone surgical. The authorizing approval came from an HOA-based recommendation letter submitted under a forged name, Colin Elsner. We've already confirmed that identity doesn't exist, and the email used to submit it traced back to a private server in Karen Ellingsworth's home. Karen's lawyer objected, but it didn't matter. The judge allowed it. Then came the ID. Vanessa placed a photo on the overhead projector. It showed a security camera still of Karen holding a document. The next still showed her hand dropping the torn pieces of Miles's state ID into a sewer grate. Gasps rippled through the room. Destruction of official identification, Vanessa said plainly, violates both state and federal law, especially when done under the pretense of property enforcement by a non-government body. Karen's mouth went dry. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered, "They're serious. You need to say something." Karen stood. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked to the front. "Your Honor," she began, "this has been blown out of proportion. I didn't destroy that ID maliciously. I believed it was fraudulent. I've spent years protecting our community from misuse, illegal renting, trespassing." The judge raised a hand. "This is not a trial, Mrs. Ellingsworth. This is a hearing to determine whether your actions meet the standard for criminal investigation. Save your statements for the grand jury if we get there." Karen returned to her seat slowly. Sweat slid behind her ear. She tried to hold on to the illusion, but it was peeling apart like wallpaper in a storm. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, the fallout had begun. The HOA board issued a public memo that same afternoon stating that Karen had been relieved of all authority pending legal review. They'd even taken down her nameplate from the community hall, something that had been bolted to the wall for 8 years. Miles didn't gloat. He simply went back to his garden and planted a new batch of tomatoes, smiling faintly when a neighbor walked by and gave him a silent nod of respect. Karen returned home to flashing cameras outside her gate and reporters on the sidewalk. One asked if she had anything to say to the residents she'd served. She said nothing. The gate creaked open and closed behind her. She was alone again, but this time there were no walls high enough to block the noise outside. Upstairs, she found another envelope on her desk. Inside was a final warning from the city. All construction on Rivervale Heights was suspended. Every permit was being audited, and any attempts to move money from related accounts would trigger immediate asset freezing. She looked out the window. The mansion she'd dreamed of. It might as well have already collapsed. She thought the courtroom would be her chance to explain. But the truth doesn't need explanations. It just needs daylight. Don't look away. Part 7 is where the real twist hits and Karen learns that the person who started her downfall wasn't even the one she suspected. Karen barely slept. She paced her dark living room in bare feet, surrounded by folders and scattered notes she once believed gave her power. Her phone was silent. Her lawyer hadn't returned her last message. Even Charles hadn't come home. She was radioactive now. She kept asking herself one question. Who gave Vanessa access? She had blamed Charles, of course, but it didn't add up. He didn't have access to everything. Some of the files that showed up in court weren't on their shared drive. They were hidden in her personal HOA folder, locked behind 2 layers of encryption. Only 2 other people had that level of access, and one of them was Linda. Karen flinched at the thought. Linda, who had once baked her cupcakes on her birthday, who'd defended her against Miles in that board meeting 6 months ago, who always nodded silently when Karen spoke, never questioned, never complained. Karen opened her laptop and dug into the HOA's audit logs. She found it. A remote login. Linda's credentials. 3 weeks ago, on a Saturday. The download logs showed a full dump. Meeting recordings, internal votes, Redland maps. Even a recording Karen didn't realize existed. Karen hit play. Her own voice crackled through the speakers. I don't care if the property line cuts through a swamp. Have Gerald redraw the study. I'll get it pushed through next week. Her hands trembled. Linda had recorded that call. Why? Miles was the problem. Vanessa was the attacker. Charles was the coward. But Linda, she had been the shadow in the room. The whole time Karen stared at the paused screen, trying to connect the moment it all started. The answer came in a flash months earlier. During a petty dispute over a dog leash fine. Linda had voted to waive the penalty. Karen overruled her publicly, harshly. It was small, insignificant, but Karen should have known people don't always fight back with words. Some pick silence and use it like a knife. Across the neighborhood, Miles stood outside with a hose, watering the grass beside his driveway. Vanessa's SUV pulled up quietly. She stepped out, sunglasses on, and handed him a file. State's going for formal charges, she said. Zoning fraud, tampering with public documents, destruction of identification, the works. Miles opened the folder. It was thick. She dragged this out. He said, "She's stubborn, dangerous." Vanessa shrugged. "Let her. Every stall gives us time. And the audit's not just about her now." He raised a brow. "Someone else." Vanessa nodded. "Linda's cooperating fully." Turns out she wasn't just collecting data. She had help. Miles tilted his head. "Who?" Vanessa smiled slightly. "Her niece, City Compliance Office. She flagged Rivervale Heights 6 months ago. Linda didn't come to us. We went to her." Miles chuckled under his breath. "Karen, thought I lit the match." She was standing on dry leaves the whole time. Vanessa replied. At that moment, Karen wasn't thinking about Miles, or Vanessa, or court. She was in her garage, staring at the blueprint pinned to the wall. Heights. 15 acres of nothing now. A shell dream collapsing in silence. The intercom buzzed. Karen walked upstairs and opened the door. Linda stood there, no smile, just a brown envelope in her hand. Karen didn't speak. Her mouth felt cemented shut. "I didn't want it to be this way," Linda said, her voice calm. "But you never listened. You thought silence meant obedience. It didn't." Karen's jaw clenched. "You betrayed me." "No," Linda replied. "You did that to yourself. I just stopped covering it up." She held out the envelope. Karen took it with stiff fingers. Inside were her own memos, printed, highlighted, labeled. The last page said only one thing. HOA, emergency vote. Removal of President Ellingsworth. Unanimous. Karen looked up. "They voted without me." "They did," Linda said. "And it's final." She turned and walked down the steps, leaving Karen standing alone in the doorway. The wind picked up, scattering old violation notices Karen had stacked near the door. They danced across her porch. Like ghosts, she crushed voices until none were left. So silence came back, not to whisper, but to roar. And when it did, it didn't come from across the fence. It came from inside her own circle. One part remains. In part 8, Karen will finally face what she ran from, and the last card Miles has been holding will change everything, even the fate of Rivervale Heights. A week after the emergency vote, Karen's nameplate was officially removed from the HOA office door. She hadn't stepped outside her house in days. The blinds stayed drawn, the porch light burned out, and the once neatly trimmed bushes along her walkway were now overgrown. Neighbors passed by quietly, some with relief, others with lingering disbelief that she was finally gone. Inside, Karen sat at her dining table, surrounded by unopened mail, legal paperwork, in a cold cup of coffee that had been poured hours earlier. She was waiting for a call, any call, from her lawyer, from Charles, even from Gerald, someone who might offer her an out. But none came. Instead, there was a knock at the door. Karen stood slowly, walked over, and cracked it open. It wasn't Linda, it wasn't the city. It wasn't a process server. It was Miles. He stood calmly on her porch, in jeans and a flannel, holding a file tucked under his arm. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm not here to yell." Karen didn't reply. She didn't open the door wider either. "Thought you might want to see the last piece," he said, holding out the folder. She didn't take it at first. "What is it?" she asked flatly. "It's the land deed," he said. "Rivervale Heights. You built it on someone else's soil." Karen froze. "That's not possible. I bought all of it." "No," Miles said. "You thought you did. Your husband's LLC acquired 25 parcels, but not the sliver near the southern bluff. The cliff access point that was never filed right. You built part of the private drive over it. You staged your project photos from it. You used it as your key entrance." Karen's voice wavered. "So what?" Miles smiled. "So I bought it." Her heart sank. "I didn't even know about it," she said, almost in a whisper. "I did," Miles replied. "After you shredded my ID, I figured if you could play dirty with paper, I could too." He handed her the folder. She took it slowly this time. "It's yours now," he added, "but so's the easement, which means if you want to move trucks through the development site again, you'll need written permission from me." Karen opened the deed. There it was, plain and final, his name, the date, and the highlighted section outlining control over road access through the bluff. "I'm not even building anymore," she said bitterly. "The permits are gone, the loans are frozen." Miles stepped back from the porch. "Then you've got nothing to worry about," he said calmly. Karen gripped the folder. "You came here to rub it in." "No," he said. "I came to end it." She looked up confused. Miles's voice was steady now. "I don't want your house. I don't want your money. I just wanted you to feel what it's like to lose something you thought couldn't be taken from you." Karen didn't say a word. She couldn't, not as the weight of it all came crashing down. She closed the door quietly, and for the first time, she didn't slam it. 2 months later, the community began to heal. The HOA board was under new leadership, led by Linda, with Miles volunteering to assist in revising the very bylaws Karen once weaponized. Violations were rewritten with clarity. Fees were reduced. A long-forgotten community garden was restored, in Rivervale Heights. It sat half-developed, its billboard sun-bleached and peeling. A skeleton of steel and glass frozen in time, Vanessa's report led to formal fraud charges. Karen's development company was dissolved. Her husband filed for divorce quietly and moved out of state. Her bank accounts were under federal lock. Her legacy reduced to court filings and tabloid headlines. But one morning she walked out. No clipboard, no sunglasses, no security cameras worry behind her. Just Karen. And when she passed by Miles in the garden, she didn't speak. But she did nod once. He didn't nod back. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. She built a mansion on paperwork and power. But she forgot when you burn someone's identity. They don't disappear. They dig deeper. And sometimes, they find the foundation beneath your feet.